Back with another episode of the Blue Turf. This is Thad Bell from the Kansas City Soccer Journal. Mr. Bergerud, how are you today?
I am doing well. How are you, Thad? I feel like I haven't seen you in person for a long time.
I know we were getting to see each other quite a lot there at the first third, almost a half of a season, but the last couple weeks has been a little bit of struggle.
Yeah, well, they've been on the road and we haven't been able to connect at the world famous KC Soccer Dome. So here we are back on Zoom talking with one another.
Yeah, so there's not as much cool ambiance in the background.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Let's see. Last time we talked, they were in Mexico, and remainder of the trip did not go so great. Well, the whole trip so far has not gone so good, but 8-2 loss, I believe, to Chihuahua.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could just take a half a step back to that Monterrey loss, 8-7. We just saw Milwaukee struggle against Monterrey on a bigger field, not the smaller Arena Borregos. And so uh, I think every team's having a challenge with Monterrey, including Chihuahua. So if you look at Chihuahua's record, 4 wins to across the league, 5 losses only to Monterrey. So Chihuahua had no problem with the Comets on Friday, played at Monterrey on Sunday, and came up with another loss. And so I do believe that these are the two best teams in the league. I think San Diego will have something to say about that in the West, but ultimately the Comets will have to figure out a way to win in Mexico if they want to lift the cup. And that's not necessarily having to win a bunch of games in Mexico. It's taking care of business at home and then choosing their moment when they're on the road. I'd say Chihuahua, great goalkeeping. They brought in, we mentioned, I think the last episode, they brought in Janoni Martinez, who's a legendary player across multiple indoor leagues. And they're a great team. They're just not Monterrey yet.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is Monterrey just yet. Monterrey just very much impressed me. I think it was a great job by Kansas City to even come close to in that second game to winning it, but ultimately Monterrey was just a better team. Chihuahua 8-2. I think a lot of that just is the injuries and tired legs to the Comets, being on the road for those games. A lot of that came into play, but Chihuahua, all credit to them. Very good team.
They're a good team. And so we're finally at the midway point. I think what I've heard players saying, I think I heard Zach Reggett say this, was the goal was to view the season in 6 game chunks, 24 game season, right? So first six, second six. I think that the goal was to be 5-1 in each of the six. So if you use that as a benchmark, the Comets aren't where they'd hope to be. They'd hope to be 10-2. That's not where they're at right now. But on the positive side, it looks like the top 4 teams in the East have created some distance from the rest of the pack. Baltimore lost at St. Louis, so Baltimore is sort of in a predicament as the odd team out right now. But a couple weeks ago, we were really enthusiastic that when they were 7-1, and they've had a pretty difficult last 4 games, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, it's going to be an indication of where they can be in the future because, like you said, you got to win on the road if you want to lift the cup. But can they climb the standings back up? It's a difficult road. We talked about this before the year. I don't know. Is this our time to switch into just looking at the mid-year total?
Sure, let's
Is
do it.
that? I think we already slipped into it, whether we actually said that or not. Eric and I try to plan these things, and sometimes it works, and sometimes I don't follow my own plan, so that's my fault. Uh, Done with the road trip in Mexico for right now. Mid-season, they are at 7-4-1, the one overtime loss, and they're not bad. Earlier, like you said, we had hoped, the way they were playing, they would be better, but we knew that this was a tough, very, very tough schedule. I mean, potentially the toughest schedule in the league. I mean, there might be other teams could argue that, but playing Monterrey so much, they only played Milwaukee the once, so they can't really even move up on them by direct competition. So that's a tough road ahead to move back up the standings now.
Well, and they're pretty tight with Milwaukee, just 2 points behind them at the midway point. So that's pretty close. I saw a quote from Coach Stokich in the Kansas City Star article written by your former colleague Nathan Dunn, uh, pointing at this Sunday's game at Utica as the most important game of the year. And so if you think about it, they dropped points at home before they went to Mexico, felt like they should have won that game. That would have changed things dramatically if they had won that game, particularly in regulation, where they would have sat compared to Utica. But now you have to try to steal points back on the road. I think that before all this, we were giving a lot of kudos to the Comets. They started on the road 3-0, and now they've dropped three. But I think it's three losses with the understanding those are two of the best, if not the best teams in the league. And so now you have to be able to show that you can go into a loud environment like Utica and steal points back.
So they have Utica up next Sunday, 28th, then the following Friday at Baltimore, and then a couple days later at St. Charles.
Yeah,
The
so
ambush.
that's an interesting weekend. So you take this one game at a time. You have Utica currently 8-2-1, Comets 7-4-1. Great goalkeeping there. You know what to expect on the field. I thought they really adjusted well at Cable Dahmer Arena, and I think they outplayed Kansas City in the transition game. So I mean, you just know that in reverse, there's coming in. I think the interesting thing with that next weekend with Baltimore and St. Louis is St. Louis just beat Baltimore pretty handily. And there's been this whole mystique about the size of the Baltimore arena and teams having a hard time there. Well, teams have won in Baltimore, and what was a week in Mexico, if not warm up for having to play at Baltimore's field. And so I think the Comets have winnable games coming ahead. You can't look past any of those opponents. I think there is a lot of respect for Utica, but even moving beyond that, I think you have to look at Baltimore and St. Louis, even though they're behind the Comets in the playoffs. You can't look past them, but you have to understand that we can't take any win for granted, and each game is going to be a battle. Friday night in Baltimore, and then you have to work your way back to Missouri on Sunday.
Yeah, and I keep sliding away from our midseason review
All
there,
right,
so I
it's all
apologize.
related.
Um, Looking at the record, looking at the play so far, are you coming off last season? You would have wanted maybe being at this record would have been okay. How are you feeling about how the Comets are midseason right now?
I felt better when they were 7-1 than 7-4-1. I mean, it's as honest as I can get that. I'd say there's a couple things that I know we're looking back, but you can't look back without looking forward, because what we want to see is what changes are going to take place in the second half of the season, build on their experiences there. And so you start in goal. I thought Neto got off to a great start. It's still not clear what happened in Mexico in terms of the change to Ejimadu and who will be starting in goal this Sunday at UCFC. TBD, right? On defense, injury problems there, but I think we mentioned on the last podcast that you would expect the veterans to be more consistent in their play. And I think that there were a few lapses in that second game against Monterrey that were out of character. And so this is an opportunity for the defenders of the year and the other season players in the back to step up and say, we're going to take this team forward. I think in the midfield, there have been some bright lights. Looking at Leo Acosta, Mikey Lennis. I know that the Comets just posted a rookie class article and featuring the two of them and Ejimadu. I think that things have been good in the midfield. Nacho has been experiencing one of his most productive years ever, although he's kind of bounced, occasionally playing defense, but mainly midfield. And then up front, Zach Reggett, although his scoring streak was halted by Chihuahua, if I had told you that Kansas City at the beginning of the season that Kansas City would have a top 3 scorer at the midway point, you probably would have been happy with that, Thad.
Oh, I think so. What he's at 21 goals and 7 assists at this point. Not too
Yeah,
shabby.
yeah, no, and I think that, the challenge has been where the season started versus where they are right now. Rion Marquez got hurt, still working his way back. Leo Gibson got off to a slow start and then picked up, but we're still not back to where we were those first couple home games where there was a 3 target rotation, occasionally 2 targets out on the field, and it created all sorts of problems for the other team. I think if Kansas City can get back to where they were mentally in November, December, and back to where they were physically November and December, they will right the ship.
Yeah, it's I know I keep sliding into the looking forward talk because to me that's where I am. That's what I'm looking at is I mean because it's just going to be such a tough schedule. So they're going to have to not just right the ship. They're going to have to get it going full steam ahead. When we talked about the beginning of this year looking forward, uh the two defender of the year previous defenders of the year would help settle things and it did. Chad was hurt for a while, Berto's hurt for a while, and that led in some maybe sliding into old habits for the team. I don't know. I think that's going to be part of coach's focus is getting them back to where they were playing the first few games. I don't know if that's still good enough to beat Monterrey in Monterrey, but it would have been a lot better chance.
Well, and we haven't talked about the other 2 veteran defenders, namely John Sosa and Ray Lee. Both are having really exceptional years. John Sosa, uh, among the league leaders in assists. It's just what we talked about all last year, Thad, was 2 things: the transition game and the Comets being countered, which has been a problem the last couple weeks, and third quarter flatness, if that's a word. And that's been a problem the last couple weeks too. And it looked like they had solved both as we began the 23-24 season. But you go back to that Utica game at Cable Dom Arena, they're up 4-1 at halftime. Utica fans are tearing their hair out, thinking the world has ended. And lo and behold, everything changes right away in the third quarter. And it just felt like we had reverted back to the 22-23 season. And so I get what you're saying about going beyond righting the ship. Somebody, I'll just say, a broadcaster from another part of the country was asking me what was going on in Kansas City, and my take is, I mean, I think that it's mindset right now is the biggest thing that Coach Stokic can focus on is how do we get mentally reset moving ahead, because I thought the mindset was really solid in November and December, and I think that it also helps when you're winning all your games, right?
Yes.
But where are they right now in terms of confidence? Where are they right now in terms of executing game plan? And so eh, these are the questions that have come up the last week. I'm looking back, right, Dad? I'm not looking ahead. These are the questions that have come up the last week plus.
Well, they definitely have. It, I wonder. I'm just going to throw this out there because I was just thinking about it as you were talking though. How much of this could be? I mean, we know that some of it is affected by injuries and people coming in and out of the lineup and not being 100% healthy and nasty road trips and all that stuff. But how much of it is still that this is a difference in how the team's trying to play from last year, and you have some rookies that are stepping up to make big contributions, but they're still rookies. They're making mistakes. I mean, I know I can look at Mikey Linus and Leo Acosta who have played great, but I can every game go, oh, they should have probably done this or that, or something at least would have been better. How much do you think is it all that combined that the terrible road trip, the the injuries and all that stuff, but it's still not a team that's 100% mature in how they play. I don't know if I asked that very well.
No, I think that's a fair question. Let me offer you a counter, right? Look at the quality of the teams they played the first 8 games, and then look at the last 4 games, right? And this has no disrespect at all for Texas, because Texas did inflict that first loss for Kansas City. But uh, I think it could be as simple as the schedule just got harder all of a sudden, right? I mean, that there is a marked difference between playing teams that are in 6th and 7th place in your division and first place teams.
Definitely, but usually when I use that excuse, you tell me you can't really, it doesn't matter who you play, you got to win. So
No, I understand that, but what we're trying to ascertain is how good is this team, right?
we
And
are.
my point is that the quality of the opponents have ratcheted up now just based on the way the schedule is. Yes, you have to play who's in front of you. And yes, we can have all sorts of discussions about Kansas City's strength of schedule versus Utica's versus Milwaukee's, et cetera. But I mean, ultimately, they're going to have to figure it out. And I'm just suggesting back to you that, yeah, there are a lot of rookies, et cetera, but it's easier to get rookies integrated when you're playing teams that are in 6th and 7th place, as opposed to throwing them in against and expecting the same results against the team that may run the table in the regular season this year.
Yeah, I truly don't disagree. I'm just trying to kind of put a little fodder for thought there.
But I guess to the Comets' credit, sure, that first game against Monterrey, write it off. The second game is interesting because I think not only should that gives the Comets some confidence that we went toe to toe with Monterrey, the undefeated Monterrey Flash, and had a couple things gone or bounced the other way, we might have come out there with a win or at least a point. They need to believe that heading into the playoffs. If they were to draw Monterrey, whether in the first round or the second round, that we've already proved that we can go toe to toe with them. And I think rookies on up, that should be the takeaway, that we know we can play, and it doesn't matter what arena we play them in, whether it's 150 feet or 180 feet, doesn't matter. We should be able to take them on. But before you get to that point, Thad, you have to prove that you can beat the non-Monterey team both at home and away. And so Utica came into Kansas City and stole 2 points. Kansas City's had some success in Utica pre-COVID. I don't think they want to repeat what happened in the wild card game last year, but
No.
Kansas City has proven that they can win in Utica. Take care of business this week, and Baltimore's looking very different than it has in years past.
Yeah, that's probably one of the bright spots for the Comets. That's it does look like a 4-team race right at the moment, but that can change. I mean, that if Comets struggle for the rest of the season, that could actually go really bad for them. All right, so I know you mentioned the article that Nathan did with the 3 rookies. They have been really good bright spots. They uh Linus has what 7 goals and 4 assists in 11 games, which is, good for tied for 4th total scoring for the Comets with Ray Lee. Leo Costa's got 7 goals and an assist in only 8 games. So he's there for a while. He was putting in 2 goals for his first 2 games, I think, each game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The guy can play. So they do have that talent that's continuing to learn and just going to be improving.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, do you see anybody else that's going to step up there and challenge for being, those leaders at this point? It's midway through the season.
I think it comes down to where's going to be the consistency of target. I mean, I really think that's going to be the more so than goalkeeping. I know that Comets fans love talking about goalkeeping. Although, what's been interesting is the normal chatter that you expect to see in the Twitch chat when things aren't going well, I really noticed that there wasn't a lot of blame thrown at Ejimadu that would have been thrown at Neto. And so,
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's some personality there in addition to performance. But for me, that's not the biggest thing to look at. The biggest thing to look at is target. You know what to expect with Reggett. I would anticipate that he's going to want to battle his friend Luis Morales and Nick Pereira all the way. uh, He's a team player, but he also likes scoring goals. So he's going to want to battle for that scoring championship, and I would expect none less from him. The question's going to be, then what, right? We've seen glimpses both from Marquez and Gibson. What's going to be the consistency on that next line? And will Coach Stokic have the flexibility to play two targets again, to mix things up again, and to get consistent results that way? That's what I'm going to be looking for, not just in that Utica game, but looking ahead the rest of the season. Because as you said, they've got young guys, young legs, guys who can score in the midfield. We've talked about their defense. It's, if you could get consistent production, and consistent production, that doesn't just mean all your targets are scoring goals. They can lay off to the runners.
Yep.
Don't care. As long as you're getting consistent production on multiple lines up front, things are going to go your way.
And I think I'm going to phrase this a slightly different way than we've been saying it for my own thought process. Because you talked about having Zach up there, getting Rion back and Leo and all that stuff. But when everybody was healthy in those first few games, again, I know it was like probably against what would be lesser competition and overall, but they had two full lines that were all potentially scoring and strong. It was like two. It would be hard to look at those two lines and go, which one is the number one line, except that would be the one with Zach on it. But you know what I mean?
Right.
It was two full lines there that could take it to any team. Where now it's more like one and a half when you don't have Rion out there, or you had the two veteran defenders that were hurt and not maybe back at 100%. Some other injuries. You also, again, on the Mexico trip, you didn't have Andreos. Trying to remember if there was anybody else that was left off because of that, but it's that competition that when they had everybody there, you could mix and match, or the other team couldn't put out their best lineup against the best lineup all the time because there was both strong lineups that were scoring,
Right.
and they just haven't had that in the last few games because of Rion being out and some of the other guys not coming back fully 100%. Because I mean, Berto was just back before the road trip.
Right. Well,
It's that balance.
you're back from Mexico. A little bit of an opportunity to rest up, and then we'll see which Comets team is going to show up for the second half of the season. I'd be remiss that if I didn't give a shout out to your KC Soccer Journal colleague, Mike Hune, who shared some interesting tidbits, and always does on his column, is Juicebox's column. He noted that Leo Gibson in Mexico had played his 300th all-time game for Kansas City. And I asked Mike, hey, Mike, share with me the top 10 all-time appearances for Kansas City. So this would include regular season and playoffs. And he's like, sure. And so Leo Gibson finds himself as number 8, 21 games behind Warren Westcoat. John Sosa, interestingly enough, 10th all-time in Kansas City in indoor soccer history. And he should pass Jeff Davis in a few weeks, or maybe later this coming month, to be 9th all time. So it's pretty impressive what Leo Gibson and John Sosa have done. For people who are curious, and we may show this on the game on February 9th, the all-time leader in terms of appearances for Kansas City. So this includes regular season and playoffs. The Bull himself, Gino Schiraldi, 465. And so what's really impressive about Leo Gibson's 300 is he's done this within the limited regular season schedule of the Major Arena Soccer League. Gino Schiraldi did that primarily in the MISL, one season with the Attack and the NPSL, but he was playing in 48 52 game seasons and accomplished that. Leo Gibson, 300. I mean, for me, in a different era, that's pretty impressive.
I think it's incredibly impressive. Yeah, I've got the list in front of me. Mike shared it with me too, just so I have it so I could talk with you about it. But I don't want to share all of them either. That's up to you to do on the broadcast. But I think it's just incredibly impressive when you talk about the Comets right now are playing 24, and I mean, what for a while there was less games
They
even.
were playing 20 for a while. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when you had those 40, 50 game seasons, that's twice the amount of I need to go back and get Mike to do that, like how many games per year, percentage wise to the
Right.
game, something to make it more even to look at that. But just it's remarkable in how many they've played.
Well, and then if you're trying to think about Leo Gibson's legacy, and I asked Brian Budzinski this question. I did a preseason interview with him, and I asked him, "What's Leo Gibson's legacy in Kansas City?" And he said, "Stay tuned for this season." And Leo hadn't signed yet, so Bud was just sort of tipping, "Hey, he still
Yep.
has game to play." But if you think all time Kansas City, and you think about players who have had their jerseys retired, players who are synonymous with this franchise, I think you put Leo Gibson up there near the top. That you can't talk about the history of indoor soccer in Kansas City without mentioning Gino Schiraldi, without mentioning Alan Mayer, and I would say without mentioning Leo Gibson. Of course, Wes Wade too.
I think there's a number of those players that would be in that conversation. And again, that's what we need to do, like list our top 10 maybe Kansas City indoor players. Just
Oh, so here's the problem with doing that. I was on Goals and Boards a couple weeks ago, and they put me on the spot. Give me your all-time team, and I'm like, how do you do that? Because there's politics involved. If you make it all MISL players, then you're going to offend newer fans. And so I try to be cute and do two from each generation, and um, maybe just some slight regret, but not really. I wound up picking two from the Cleveland Crunch NPSL days, two San Diego Soccer defenders from the MISL days, and then more recently, I went with IB26, and then I got a little controversial with Paulo and goal. But my point about Paulo and goal is, if I were playing a team right now, the way the rules are, and who would adapt to that was my mindset. And so I heard from other announcers and people, and I was asked pointedly, why didn't you pick Danny Waltman? And I totally get that. A lot of respect for Danny Waltman, a lot of respect for Chris Toth, for Boris Pardo, etc. It's just always tough when you're like, who's the all-time? And I so if you're talking about who's all-time Kansas City, Thad, how do you differentiate between the eras and give people credit regardless?
I know that it's an impossible to do in a fair and just manner. I mean, like, how do you look at who is the best baseball player when you got fat old guys like Babe Ruth hitting home runs and, modern beasts out there that are physical specimens? But you just the only way I can judge it is relative to their time. That's the only way I can do it. So, yes, maybe Gino played more games than Leo, but was Gino more important to the Comets than Leo was at that time? I mean,
Sure.
it's kind of the only way I can really think to do it, because there is no real fair way to do that sort of thing.
Well, and who's right in front of Leo on this all-time list is Warren Westcoat. So if you think about goalkeeping records in Kansas City, it's going to be really hard for anybody to top Warren Westcoat because of his longevity. The
Yep.
NPSL didn't play as many games as MISL, but if you think about it, the original Comets turned over a lot of goalkeepers. Alan Mayer got his number retired, but he was only a Comet for less than a handful of years, right?
Right.
Warren Westcoat was around for a long time. And so if you start thinking about being an all-timer, there is something to say about longevity. And you start talking about John Sosa's longevity with the Comets, Leo Gibson's longevity with the Comets. Leo Gibson in particular, think about how many years he's been on the Comets, right? Going back to the rebirth. How many years were the original Comets in existence? 10.
Yeah.
How many years has he been playing?
For the Comets?
Yeah. He
Yeah.
started in 2010, right?
Yep. So
Yep. So,
13
I mean,
seasons?
he's been here more seasons than the original Comets existed. And so it's hard to have these discussions, but what I hope that we continue to do is show the proper level of respect for the current game, and particularly the players who've been here for 10, 12, 14 seasons. Doesn't matter how many games you play. That's a long commitment in this world to one team, or in some cases, two teams. But that's a long stretch because there are a lot of Comets on the original team who are lauded for being all-time greats who really only played 3 years, 4 years, in some cases 2 years with Kansas City.
I
In
know
in
that
the big scheme of things, how do you rate all this?
I know it's always interesting for me because I did not grow up in Kansas City. Um, always knew about the Comets and respected them, but I didn't have that same history as a lot of people in Kansas City. So it is interesting. Sometimes I go back and look at those players. I was around more for the attack and the second Comets and now the third Comets. But the when you do look at the records and they're like, wait a minute, that guy was here for 3 years, but he played for 4 years with the Wichita and he played 2 years in Seattle. I'm like,
Yep,
these guys here, Leo and John, and some of the guys who are already retired, but they played for better part of their careers here. It's
that's right. And that should be lauded, appreciated, and celebrated. And that's my point is we spend maybe too much time talking about the quote unquote good old days. I think what Nick Vassos and I try to do is put things in perspective. And so for me, there's three different eras of indoor soccer in Kansas City, and we can talk about all of them. But I'll remind anybody who says the original Comets won 0 championships. Had to be the attack to come in to win 2, and then these Comets have won 1, but those successes weren't there originally.
no,
And so looking at the long stretch of indoor soccer in Kansas City, I mean, for me, I will always have emotional connections to people who won a championship for my team and for my city. There's nothing quite like that. And so those attack players, and this is no disrespect at all for the original Comets. I was a season ticket holder. I went to games. You know, but when you get to see the trophy do a circle around your arena, you know, that stays with you for a lifetime. And I think that we would be doing the attack and the current Comets a disservice if we didn't celebrate that those were the teams that brought trophies back to Kansas City.
I don't disagree. I think they each deserve um, their being lauded in different ways. The original Comets, they may not have won trophies, but they helped introduce the city more to soccer in general. They, were one of the best attended, if not the best attended.
Yep.
It was amazing stuff. I mean, I wish I would have could have been there. Yeah,
Yep.
they helped build this into one of the soccer capitals of the country.
If not
Against,
the,
yep.
that's a whole separate podcast, Thad.
I know that's why I didn't try to define it yet. We've discussed this before, and we will discuss it again, especially anytime Comets go to play in St. Charles. Um, but yeah, I think they each deserve their own, you know, uh, adulation, their own recognition in just different ways. And some of those guys from the original Comets are still around, and are people that I looked up to playing around the city. In fact, I played against some of them in All American Indoor Sports a few times.
Well, and I mean, my point is respect to everybody.
Yep.
And as we're thinking about where the current Comets and where the current MASL fits, we're in a very different time. We're in a different space for indoor soccer. You look at it at the quality of teams today, and I would argue that this is more competitive, the MASL is, than what this league was 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Definitely.
This Monterrey team, there's extraordinary talent there. I mean, talent that is generational talent, meaning that you could put them in the time machine and they would be competitive. And so uh, I choose to celebrate what we have. I choose to get excited with where we're going. And I know we were supposed to do a mid-year review, and I think we did.
Sort of, yeah.
It's
Probably
sort
not
of,
as
yeah.
probably not quite as in depth as we planned, but yeah.
No, but I think we have a lot to celebrate in Kansas City. I think the Comets fans, although they may not be as optimistic as they were 2 weeks ago, that there is great potential that things could get better in the second half. Will they catch Monterrey? I think that would be a tall order for anybody to catch Monterrey. But could they be a second place team? Absolutely, they could be a second place team.
They could.
And then you take your chances.
They just have to go out and do it.
That's exactly right.
We only have about a minute left, so I'm just going to add one thing to all the former player talk. Is I would actually like to see more banners up in the roof, up in the ceiling, the rafters, recognizing some of those players from the past. The two that are up there are amazing. I would like to see some more that
Well,
are deserving.
and maybe we should talk in a future podcast about who is deserving.
We will. All right.
Awesome.
Thank you, Eric. And I could probably talk for a lot longer, but those free Zooms when we can't be at the world famous Kansas City Soccer Dome, take up time. So I appreciate the time, sir, and I will talk to you later.
Sounds great. Thanks, Thad.
We are out.